Hello, I am an amateur glass artist and a general maker of things. So when my friend said their lampshade broke in a recent move, I was like, wait, I work with glass, I could make something to replace that. So I got a general idea in my head and I thought I'd show you guys how I go from a base to a prototype. And over here, you'll eventually have the final product. I haven't made the final product when I filmed this, so let's go! In my mind, there are three parts to this project. There's the base, the shape of the actual lamp, and then the design. Now, I'm making it for my friend who already has the base, so that's sorted. The shape, I'm thinking a six-sided lamp, but I'd like to keep this kind of rounded bottom edge, so I'm going to combine the two pictures you see above. And for the design itself, I'd like something quite happy, so I'm thinking oranges with a little blue background tied back into that bottle, and then throw in a little bird because I think that'd be quite cute. It's sitting among the branches. So this is the final idea I came up with. Alright, now we're going to go on to make a paper prototype that's not only going to fit our original sketch to get the proportions right, but it also has to fit my friend's lamp base. So I'm going to do this in Procreate to help me out. Now this is a bit of a trust the process situation, but essentially what you want to do is you want to import a picture of your sketch, scale it up to fit in a circle, then draw a hexagon around that circle, and that will give you the proportions of a six-sided lamp. Then, if you draw a line through the middle of the hexagon, it'll help you scale it up to fit the bottom of your sketch. This will give your lamp the proportions that you have in the sketch. Now all you have to do is move the bottoms of the hexagon to fit the top and bottom of your sketch. Then you join those up. Now this centerpiece essentially is the panels you're going to make for your lamp. You can also draw in the side panels to give you a visual overall idea of what your lamp will look like. The last thing I'm going to do to this panel is add that arch at the bottom to give it more of a rounded look. Now we have the proportions of our panel, we now need to size it up to fit our real life base, and this is going to involve some maths. Essentially, my idea is to make each of these squares 10mm big. The canvas I'm using in Procreate is already set to A4, so all I need to do is figure out how many pixels wide it is and how many millimeters wide it is. I just simply divide these two, which will give me how many pixels is per millimeter. I can then times this by 10 to find out how many pixels I need per square to get a 10mm square box. Once I've set the grid in Procreate to 118 pixels, I know that each square is 10mm, so I simply need to scale up that diameter to be a little bit less than 10 of the squares, and voila! You now have a pattern that should fit your real life base. I then get to print it out. I included a little centimeter square in the top left corner to check that the printer isn't like changing the size of anything, but essentially I get to cut it all out, then tape it together. I then folded it, making sure that the pieces line up nicely, and I started sketching out my design. And this should leave you with something like this. As I was drawing the design, I kept rotating it constantly to make sure that the pattern flowed nicely between the panels. And eventually you do have to finalize it in a pen to give yourself a clear pattern. Then we get to see if it actually fits the base. Oh, thank goodness, it does. So then we get to tape it on, which turns out to be one of the more fiddly things out of this whole thing so far. But it's definitely worth it because you get to see it as a whole on the base in a prototype, and it gave me a lot of confidence to crack on with the rest of the project. Now we get to move on to making the pattern for the glass and doing final details. Because I already have this panel, I just took a picture of my design and scaled it to fit the panel. I was able to then trace it, and that gave me a digital version of my pattern for each panel, which I could then color and put together to see what the lamp would look like all together. A little fun side thing you can do is you can scale the canvas to be a double hobby cot, and because all the panels are set to real life, you can see if all your blue pieces will, for example, fit in a double hobby cot. So you can just go online and buy that and not buy anything else. That's right, get rid of all the other stuff. You don't need that for this project. See? Restraint. For the first time ever, I'm using a Cricut cutter to cut out my pattern pieces, which I'm very excited about because I've heard people have good success. I'll also print out some paper versions of my pattern and match the numbers between the two. Now we come to my favorite part, which is choosing the glass we're going to use for the project. I like holding it up against the light to see how the light flows through the glass. And of course, we gotta look at any new glass we've bought online for the project. However, when you buy glass online, it sometimes shows up a little bit more transparent. Now, I don't know why I was shocked that glass was transparent, but in my head, I think we could recover this with some etching compound to try to frost the glass. So I ran to Hobbycraft, read the instructions, got some warm gloves on, whacked some on there. I've never used this stuff before, so we were going on hopes and prayers. However, the first time it didn't come out very frosted, so the second time I just used all of it, and to be honest, it came out more frosted, so I think we're pretty happy with that. That will do. With that out of the way, we can actually start placing our pattern pieces. I use the numbers with a reference to be able to place the right patterns on the right colors and in the right areas. Before you know it, you have all your pattern pieces placed. Now I can start cutting my glass. I need a base to capture all the little splinters. I need my scoring tool, my cutting oil, and both my pliers. With my paper reference, I'm ready to start scoring the glass. I like to cut my bigger glass pieces into smaller chunks so it's easier to cut the more detailed pieces. And of course, on my very first cut, I managed to go through a different pattern. Just the edge of it. But you know what? We press on. One of the reasons I wanted to use the vinyl from a Cricut cutter is that because it's so sticky, you can just re-stick it down to the glass if this happens. So thanks to the Cricut cutter, crisis averted. I like to try to score and crack off as much glass I can from around the pattern piece. I do find that this helps in the grinding process because you don't have to grind away as much off the glass. And with the final cut and the final few taps, our first piece is ready. I did spring a little leak, so I had to patch myself up, so I'm assuming that first cut was the unlucky one. Soon enough though, I had cut out all the other little pieces. Then we place them all in the pattern. For difficult pieces, I like to do the most difficult cut first, as then I don't waste time when it breaks after. For deep curves, I like to do several smaller cuts to build up to that deeper curve. I find that grossing pliers is perfect for this to just nip off the sides, and gentle tapping can really help guide the crack. At the end of the day, it doesn't need to be perfect because anything you can't cut, the grinder can take off for you. And before you know it, you're placing your last pieces in your pattern, and some pieces are in more pieces. Now on to grinding. I like to have my paper pattern under a piece of plastic. Grinding glass involves water to catch all the glass dust, so the pieces are wet when they come off the grinder. The plastic just helps protect the paper when I check the pattern. Now from my point of view, you can actually see the glass grinder taking away the extra glass, making the glass fit the pattern better. And then you just do that a bunch more until all your pieces are ready. Next up is copper foiling, but that takes a while and I get cold, so I'm actually going to sneak inside for this next bit. Now we've snuck inside, we're going to start copper foiling our glass. I'm going to use black back copper because I want to patina our glass. Once I got the vinyl off, I gave the glass a little bath because I want to remove any dust that's left over from the grinder. You want to place the copper tape evenly on the edge of the glass so the same amount of copper tape wraps around the glass. Try to keep this as consistent all the way around the glass as I can. I then go around with my hands, kind of folding the tape before I go in with my fid, just really smoothing that copper tape in. I essentially do this a bunch more for all the different pieces until it's all done. I then go in and try to make each of the sides as straight as possible, pretty much going back and forth, and then eventually taking a piece I've already done and try to match the size of each one because they can shrink a little bit in grinding. Try to make them as similar as possible, and then I'm going to use a taping method to fix all the pieces together for soldering. This makes us able to flip the piece over and, oh no, we have an escapee, place that guy back. It also shows us how bad we were at grinding and all the little gaps that solder's going to have a problem with. Luckily, you can place little pieces of the copper tape folded up in these cracks to help the solder set. Especially the beak where I decided to have like a black solder beak, I filled that with the copper tape. And that means you're ready for soldering. Always wear your safety equipment, that means both glasses and mask. Soldering iron warm, we can now start applying flux. I like to really rub it in to try to get the copper back up to a shine. Clean and tin my soldering iron before going in with my lead-free solder and start tacking the pieces together. With lead-free solder, it can be a bit difficult, so I like to just go in and get a decent amount of solder onto my piece and then go back in afterwards to try to clean up those lines. Once I'm happy with my piece, I flip it over, get rid of all the old tape. It might sometimes be a little bit burnt, usually it's okay, and then I start all over on the other side. I have seen other really skilled glass artists not copper foil smaller pieces. That didn't work out for me. I'm not that skilled, so I had to go back in with copper tape, then actual wire to strengthen up the piece. With that crisis aside, I actually got to put all my panels side by side and have a first glimpse of what the lamp will look like in the end, and it's very exciting. I realized that the tape won't stick to the flux, so I had to give them a wee clean before flipping the entire piece over and start taping all of the pieces together. This meant that I could essentially tuck it all up and then shape it into a lamp. Because we'd made a prototype, the base actually fit inside the lamp, and that was a massive relief. I then went back in and I strengthened up the outside of the lamp with tape as well. To actually be able to attach the lamp base to the lamp, I decided to just copper foil the top. So I just wrapped it around, used the fit to smooth it down, and then went back in with any areas that I might have missed. I then used a little bit of flux and tinned the entire thing. Now I could start assembling everything together. So I tack soldered in the lamp base. I tack soldered each side of the lamp together. I doubled back afterwards, trying to reinforce all the panels together. Then I went back and reinforced the actual base of the lamp itself. And then I filled all the cracks with solder as much as I could. Afterwards, I worked on the inside of the lamp, trying to make each of the joints as kind of pretty as possible. I then had to jerry-rig this crazy cardboard contraption to keep the solder lines on the outside of the lamp horizontal, so I could clean them up and make them look as neat as possible. And that is the last soldering we have to do. Now we're in the final steps of making this lamp. Black patina is next, which requires a lot of prep. First, cleaning it well with dish soap, then going in with baking soda, which will help neutralize the flux, which can interrupt the black patina. After drying off the lamp, I'm going to go in with steel wool. This is just going to help the black patina take to our solder a bit better because we're using lead-free solder. Now originally I thought of using a little magnet, but there was way too much steel coming off, so I used a hoover to get it off. Lastly, we're going to use this magic eraser to go over all the solder lines, getting out the last impurities. Now patina is pretty scary chemically, so we're going to use all the safety equipment. We're going to use gloves, glasses, mask, and be in a well-ventilated area for all of this. Patina seems to go a long way, so I just used a little brush and filled up the cap, and the transformation honestly feels kind of magical. Like, that is so quick and so black all at once. Honestly, it's kind of crazy to me. I just kept going over all the lines, trying to really get it in there, making sure everything seemed black and doing the bottom as well. This is my first time using patina, so I was a bit scared it would stain the glass, but it cleaned up really well. Now I went over with some pledge to just protect everything and give it a good polish. And we get to see what it actually looks like. The patina isn't super black, but all the colors look really nice in the sun. But more importantly, what does it look like as a lamp? This is the final results, and my friends were so excited when they saw it, and there's nothing that beats making something for someone you love. I'm pretty happy with how the lamp turned out in the end. I would say it's a little bit squint, I'm not gonna lie, it's a little bit squashed, so in the future I'd probably build a base or something to like make sure everything was apart. Definitely have somewhere to go with patinaing, I'm definitely new to that. But overall it was a really fun project. I love the colours spilling on the walls at the end, and I'm glad I frosted it. That was a worth side missions, always worth going on, I think. But if you guys are interested and like this, I have many more projects I have in my head that I would love
to share with you guys. This is my first video, so I don't know how to do the whole like, subscribe thing, but if you are interested in my future videos, I guess do that. That's what I've seen other people do. So yes. Anyway, thank you guys so much for coming along. It's been really fun.